Today, we're going to examine one of the most controversial figures in the Middle East, Bashar al-Assad. In 2000, after the death of his father, Assad became the president of Syria. Over the years, he has been at the center of a series of changes and difficult decisions in the country. But who is Bashar al-Assad, and why is the world still talking about him today? His relationships with the West, the devastation caused by the Civil War, and much more will be discussed. Let's take a deeper look at his story and the life of this complex leader who has shaped Syria's future. Bashar al-Assad was born in 1965 in Damascus. His family was one of the most powerful political families in Syria. His father, Hafez al-Assad, took power in 1970 after a coup and ruled the country with an iron fist for 30 years. Hafez al-Assad's rule was built on a military structure with tight control over the security services, the army, and other state organs. Bashar initially intended to pursue a medical career, but his family's political power would shape his future. In 1994, after the sudden death of his older brother Basil, Hafez began preparing Bashar for the future leadership of Syria. Bashar returned to Syria and quickly entered political life. This marked the beginning of his rise to power, but the family's authoritarian policies would soon take hold of the country. Assad went to London for medical studies in 1992. His years in the West exposed him to a different worldview, and he became interested in modernization and reform. Many believed that Assad, with his Western education, would bring new changes to Syria. However, in 1994, after the death of his older brother, Bashar returned to Syria, and his father began grooming him to take over the country. Bashar's return marked the beginning of a shift in Syria's political landscape. Although some initial reforms seemed promising, including some economic changes and modest moves toward press freedom, Assad soon adopted more authoritarian tactics. By 2005, the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri led to increased international criticism, with many accusing Assad of dictatorial rule. When Bashar al-Assad assumed power in 2000 following his father's death, many saw him as a young leader full of promise. The Syrian people held on to hopes for reform, modernization, and a more open society. In the early 2000s, Assad took some economic steps and implemented limited reforms, sparking hope in the public. However, Bashar quickly began to suppress political opposition and calls for more freedom. Particularly in 2005, after the assassination of Rafik Hariri in Lebanon, international sanctions against Syria escalated. The West viewed Assad with increasing skepticism, accusing him of maintaining an authoritarian regime while presenting himself as a modernizing figure. In 2011, with the influence of the Arab Spring, protests broke out across Syria. The people demanded freedom and democracy, but Assad's regime responded with violent repression, sending in the military to suppress the uprisings. These protests quickly escalated into a full-scale civil war. Assad's regime, with the support of Russia and Iran, managed to survive the turmoil. Russia provided air support and military aid, while Iran helped with financial and military backing for local militias. Meanwhile, the West supported the opposition. Despite this, Assad regained control over much of the country, aided by his foreign backers. The war's toll has been catastrophic, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost, millions displaced, and Syria's infrastructure left in ruins. Russia's intervention in 2015 marked a pivotal moment for Assad. Syria, for Russia, was a key military base and a strategic ally in the Middle East. With Russian airstrikes and support, Assad began to push back against the rebels. Meanwhile, Iran and Hezbollah also bolstered Assad's military efforts. The West, however, continued to support the Syrian opposition. Assad's regime, with the help of its foreign backers, regained territory and solidified its hold on power, though the war had ravaged the country. Despite widespread international condemnation and sanctions, Assad remained firmly in power, supported by Russia and Iran. One of the most notable aspects of Assad's foreign policy was his alliances with regional powers. In addition to Russia and Iran, China also provided economic and military support. Assad strategically built alliances with local militias, pushing back rebel forces and solidifying his grip on power. However, his relations with the West remained tense, and Syria became one of the most isolated nations in the world. While Assad's allies viewed him as a leader who had weathered the storm of the civil war, His critics accused him of maintaining a dictatorial regime that had caused immense suffering for the Syrian people. Today, Syria is still struggling to recover from the effects of the civil war, with Assad remaining in power. However, his control is not absolute, as some areas are still held by groups such as ISIS, Kurdish forces, and other armed factions. Although Assad has regained much of Syria, parts of the country remain outside of his control. The humanitarian crisis is far from over, with millions of Syrians still displaced. Assad's future as Syria's leader remains uncertain, as rebuilding the nation's economy, infrastructure, and social fabric presents a monumental challenge. His government's efforts to unite the country are complicated by the ongoing presence of foreign powers and rebel groups. Bashar al-Assad's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He began with promises of reform, but ultimately ended up as a dictator responsible for a brutal crackdown on opposition and dissent. The Syrian Civil War has left deep scars on the nation, and Assad's rule has caused untold suffering. However, his ability to maintain power with the help of international allies like Russia and Iran has kept him in the presidential palace. His legacy will be one of controversy, as he is seen both as a leader who saved his country from collapse and as a dictator responsible for a devastating war. Today, we've examined the life of Bashar al-Assad, his rise to power, the impact of the civil war, and his place in world politics. Assad remains a significant figure not only for Syria, but for the entire Middle East. Share your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe to our channel, and see you in the next video.